Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for the latest edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook, and we have a full docket this week. We're talking about everything from the state of the Potlotek moderate livelihood fishery to Port Hawkesbury's Pride Month activities. We also find out why Richmond County's municipal budget was delayed, and we'll tell you about why the county and the Property Valuation Services Corporation is working together to try to find out why so many Richmond County properties have gone untaxed over the past half-century. But we begin with the story that has shaken Canadians from coast to coast to coast, specifically the discovery of the remains of 215 children at a residential school site in Kamloops, British Columbia. Nowhere has this been felt more prominently than in the Native communities here in the Strait area, and a member of one of those Indigenous communities has spearheaded a campaign to lower Canadian and Nova Scotia flags at municipal buildings across the province. His name is Bryson Syllaboy. We're going to tell you his story and the outcome of his desire to lower those flags right now. The provincial and Canadian flags were flying at 2:15 p.m. on a cool, dry Monday afternoon in Port Hawkesbury, but not for long. These flags were lowered to honor the 215 children whose bodies were reported found at the residential school site in Kamloops, BC, only a few days earlier. The idea for a flag-lowering ceremony in Port Hawkesbury and municipalities across the province was the brainchild of local Mi'kmaq activist Bryson Syllaboy. His mother and several other members of his family attended the Shubenacadie residential school, and Syllaboy himself attended one of the so-called Indian day schools that prevailed around the Maritimes during the period of the residential schools. So the idea of having the Civic Center flags lowered for the 215 hours that represent the children that didn't return from the residential school in Kamloops is a personal one for him.
I am a first-generation residential school survivor. My mother went to the residential school in Shubenacadie. My aunts and uncles, a few of my cousins, and my grandparents, and so on top of that, I am Indian day school survivor. So it really hits home. Survivors and their descendants, they suffer from intergenerational trauma. Due to the residential school system. So, it's felt, 2 or 3 generations after the person went. For me, personally, I was never brought up in the culture. I was not allowed to learn the language and stuff like that. So that's how it affected me and my siblings and, my cousins and stuff like that.
Syllaboy found that the reaction among Canadians to the news out of Kamloops seemed slow in the hours following the initial reports. However, once the public had the chance to digest what was going on, Syllaboy sensed that the time was right to launch a campaign to lower flags at municipal buildings, and he found quick acceptance from Port Hawkesbury's mayor.
I feel like that this was important to do in Port Hawkesbury because, we have to show our solidarity all across Canada, from coast to coast to coast, and to stand with the 215 children that were murdered in the residential school in Kamloops. So I brought it to my mayor to see if we could do that, and she was all supportive of it, and we were successful.
I would start off by thanking Bryson for certainly for the idea to lower the flags. 215 hours, 1 per child. That works out roughly to be 9 days. As soon as I read the request that came forward to me on social media, I reached out to our council right away and asked them, would they support and consider. And of course, the support was there. And I worked with Bryson to make arrangements to have our flag lowered, and here we are today.
Mayor Chisholm Beaton said that she was still sick to her stomach for several days after hearing the news out of Kamloops, and she collaborated quickly with Mi'kmaq representatives to try to bring flags down across the province. Following a phone call from Wagamah First Nations Chief Annie Bernard Daisley to try to get contact information for municipal leaders, Mayor Chisholm Beaton and Chief Bernard Daisley worked together to contact municipal and Indigenous representatives across the province. As of Monday, 90% of all rural municipalities across Nova Scotia had lowered their flags in honor of the 215 children whose bodies were found in Kamloops late last week. However, while he's grateful for this support, Bryson Syllaboy points out that the story of Canada's residential schools can't end with the lowering of flags in this instance.
Basically, it starts with a grassroots approach. So at home, we can have these serious discussions with our peers, with our family members, especially with our children. You know, like this starts at their age. You know, like it's never too young. They're never too young to learn about what happened in the residential school system. There are a lot of resources, a lot of children books available for learning about the residential school system. So it's all about having that grassroots conversation and starting the change from there.
The fallout from the discovery of children's remains at the Kamloops residential school site wasn't the only difficult issue that Indigenous communities in our area have been dealing with this spring. On the first day of the lobster fishing season in St. Peter's Bay, Department of Fisheries and Oceans officials seized several traps put out by a member of the Potlotek First Nation moderate livelihood fishery. More traps have been seized since then, and only a couple of weeks later, Potlotek First Nation announced legal action against the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for its activities in St. Peter's Bay against Potlotek-issued fishermen. We're going to talk to the CEO of Potlotek First Nation, Crystal Nicholas, in just a moment to discuss these issues, but first, here's a bit of background on this story. The latest dark clouds over the moderate livelihood fishery pursued by Potlotek First Nation arose on the first day of lobster season in Lobster Fishing Area 29, including St. Peter's Bay. A Potlotek fishery harvester had 37 lobster traps seized by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Officials with Potlotek and with the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq chiefs insisted that the fish harvester in question was following the community plan set out by Potlotek First Nation in consultation with DFO this past fall. Potlotek officials would later claim that over 100 traps were seized from multiple harvesters during that same period in late April and early May. This came on top of close to 300 traps that were seized by DFO officers from Potlotek fishers this past fall. Officials also insisted that Potlotek First Nation had been fully transparent with DFO in the development and sharing of their plan to implement their treaty right to fish and sell fish for a moderate livelihood as recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada in the Marshall decision of 1999. On May 11th, Potlotek First Nation confirmed that it had filed a legal proceeding against the DFO, challenging the validity of the DFO in its limitations of Mi'kmaq livelihood harvesting activities. According to the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq chiefs, the DFO's Fisheries Act and regulations unjustifiably infringe on the treaty right affirmed in the Marshall decision of 1999 to fish for a moderate livelihood. The Assembly supported Potlotek First Nation in its efforts to fight these actions. In a statement, Chief Wilbert Marshall said, quote, "We are filing for a declaration that the Fisheries Act and regulations are invalid as against authorized Mi'kmaq harvesters who are in compliance with our community's livelihood plan." In another quote, Chief Marshall declared, "Our harvesters have a right to be out on the water, and that right was affirmed by the highest court in the country. DFO continues to put limitations on our livelihood fishery when they have no justification or position to." One day after Potlotek announced its legal challenge against the DFO, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq chiefs confirmed that it was supporting Potlotek's legal proceedings through the development of a livelihood fisheries collaborative enforcement protocol. The protocol was provided to DFO on May 11th, the same day Potlotek confirmed its legal action, under the Terms of Reference for a Mi'kmaq Nova Scotia Canada consultation process. According to a statement from the Assembly, the protocol is intended to further demonstrate to Canada that the Mi'kmaq have developed rules around productive monitoring, enforcement, and oversight of fishing activities in relation to their community-authorized livelihood plans. So how is Potlotek First Nation and the community in general dealing with the latest developments in the moderate livelihood fishery dispute? To get some answers, we spoke to the Chief Executive Officer of Potlotek First Nation, Crystal Nicholas. Here's that interview now. And we welcome back to Telile 24/7 this morning the Chief Executive Officer of Potlotek First Nation, Crystal Nicholas. Crystal, thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's good to have you here to talk about the moderate livelihood fishery and Potlotek First Nation's position in it. It has been a difficult spring once again. We have seen traps cut on boats that were part of the Potlotek moderate livelihood fishery. Now, I do understand that these were not cut by Department of Fisheries and Oceans as we saw last fall. What can you tell me about the situation and whether there's been any involvement of law enforcement to try to deal with the situation?
Yeah, there was rumors around that traps were cut. From what I understand, I haven't heard anything other than that. But I do know that 105 traps were seized by DFO from authorized harvesters.
Okay. So there's been another seizure again then from DFO, and this follows a similar situation this past fall. Can I get your immediate reaction to this and what Potlotek First Nation does in response to something like this happening not just once last fall, but again in the spring?
It is kind of frustrating. DFO CMP branch continues to seize traps.
What do you feel the tone is like going out on the water this time as compared to last time? And I mean, obviously, negotiations have continued through the winter with federal fisheries officials and with fellow First Nations here in Nova Scotia about the moderate livelihood fishery. But going from there to now, what do you feel like the tone is like in terms of the individual safety of the fishermen, but also about the discussions with the federal levels at that point?
Very slow movement. But the fishers continue to go out fishing, and we just want a safe fishing season.
I understand there's been some movement on the court injunction filed by Potlotek First Nation against the federal government in terms of the rights of Mi'kmaq fishers to pursue a moderate livelihood fishery. Are you able to speak to that at all today?
I'm not able to comment on matters that are before the courts.
This is not directly connected to Potlotek, but the purchase of Clearwater by a consortium that included several Mi'kmaq partners last fall, did that help to change the game a little bit in terms of the discussions that have been happening with the federal government? Has that made any kind of an impact, or does that seem like a separate matter?
Well, the exercise of treaty rights, which include the livelihood fishery as a distinct type of fishery outside of the commercial fishery, the Clearwater purchase and our Mi'kmaq rights-based fishery are completely separate.
What state are the discussions between Potlotek First Nation and DFO and the minister's office at this point? You mentioned it's slow going, but do you feel like there are any issues that are taking center stage right now in terms of being able to hammer this out? What can you tell me about the nature of the talks at this point?
Well, we've seen little change in the actions of DFO. The Supreme Court of Canada found that the Mi'kmaq have a constitutionally protected right to harvest for moderate livelihood. DFO is ignoring that court ruling and trying to impose their own rights and regulations and legislation on the fishery that is outside of their jurisdiction. So our harvesters are frustrated. They cannot afford to continue to have their traps and gear seized. And the seized gear, it's property that's properly tagged under our community Nittigal livelihood fishing plan. So that should not be happening at all. Our harvesters have every right legally to be out there on the water.
I asked you this last time, and I'll ask you again as we start to wind down this interview, Crystal. What's the feeling around Potlotek First Nation, knowing not only that this happened before, but that it literally is happening again? It seems like every time the Potlotek fishers go out, DFO is there and DFO is seizing traps. I mean, what kind of an impact does that make on Potlotek First Nation, even among those that aren't directly connected to the fishery?
The struggle is definitely real. It's disheartening. It really is disheartening when your fishers are just trying, barely scraping by and losing all of this gear every time they go out. So, the community stands behind their fishers, the fishers stand behind their plan, and we're going to keep fishing. We're going to keep moving forward.
You're here professionally, of course, as the CEO of Potlotek First Nation. You're neck deep in all of these negotiations, but have you felt a personal impact? And I mean, answer this question any way you want. I mean, does this affect you personally to see this type of thing happening continually?
It does. It really does. It really does hit home when your treaty rights are not being supported, you know.
We know this is not an easy time for Potlotek First Nation. Once again, we do appreciate you taking some time to give us an update on all of this. Crystal, thank you very much for joining us on Telile 24/7 again.
No problem.
All right. Crystal Nicholas is the Chief Executive Officer of Potlotek First Nation, and we've been speaking to her via Zoom from the Band Council office. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. This time of year, municipal councils in our area are usually busy striking tax rates and trying to pass their municipal budgets for the following 12 months. That was the case recently in Port Hawkesbury and Mulgrave, and both towns have maintained their residential and commercial tax rates despite having to deal with budget shortfalls largely brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Similar shortfalls were happening in Richmond County this year, which made for quite a challenge for Richmond municipal councillors attempting to pass their first budget since being elected this past fall. At last month's regular council meeting, it was on the agenda for Richmond councillors to pass their budget and strike their tax rates. However, concerns raised at that meeting resulted in one final budget meeting being held on Tuesday and a special council meeting being held to vote on that budget on Wednesday. When the dust settled on Richmond County's budgetary process, a 1-cent tax increase in both the residential and commercial arenas resulted. Residents of Richmond County will now have to pay 81 cents per $100 of assessment, while the commercial tax rate is set at $2.11 per $100 of assessment. In a statement released shortly after the budget was approved, Richmond Council confirmed that highlights of the budget include an increase in mandatory contributions for services such as policing, education, and housing of over $120,000. The 2021-22 budget also includes provision for several studies that Council determined were priority investments. These include a refresh of the Richmond County Strategic Plan, an assessment of the former West Richmond Education Center school building in Evanston, a trails study, an accessibility study, a leachate study, and an inflow and outflow study for the Petit de Gras sewer system. In addition, the budget will also build on the work of the previous Richmond Council by increasing investments for nonprofits by approximately $100,000 in a combination of funds set aside for future grant applications and specific strategic investments in organizations such as Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health, the Office of Richmond's Senior Safety Coordinator, Straight Area Transit, local museums, food banks, and other such organizations. Overall, Richmond County passed a balanced budget of $14.1 million at the special council meeting held this past Wednesday. District 5 Councillor Brent Sampson was the only member of Richmond Council to vote against the budget. To try to find out how we got to this exact point, I've decided to speak with Richmond County's Deputy Warden, Michael Digdon, one of several councillors who brought up issues about the budgetary process during the regular meeting in May. Here's that interview with Michael Digdon right now.
The whole purpose was to have one more budget meeting. We sat through 8 of them, I guess, or 7 of them. I believe it was 8. And I wasn't comfortable, personally, I wasn't comfortable with the breakdown. I didn't have, the grasp or the hold on all the facts and figures. And I just wanted to make sure before we, as our first council, rolled out our first budget, that it was 100%, I'm not going to say foolproof or done to its best, but to the best of our ability. And one of the things that bothered me, I believe, was we were sitting on a 3-cent increase at that time, and I just felt with the year that the people and the residents of Richmond County were going through, a 3-cent increase was very high. And it's my job and the other 4 councillors' job to do what we can do to help our constituents and work with, administration staff at the same time. So I felt that it was necessary for myself, at least, to get one more look at the budget. So that's why I voted to have it deferred to another budget meeting.
You actually said at that council meeting on the record that you felt that you yourself might have even made a mistake in terms of interpreting what was going on at the last budget meeting, that you had felt that it was a matter of giving approval to the last section of the budget for this coming year, where it was actually a matter of coming on consensus for the entire budget, and that this would be the last budget meeting. Can you speak to that a little bit, and about how important it is to try to make sure this all makes sense to all 5 councillors around the table before we get going?
Sure, I can, for sure. So as we were introduced by the CAO and the CFO to the way the budget worked, it was broke down in sections. You know, I'm going to say like water and sewer and capital and expenses. So they broke it down in sections so that we could understand it and kind of get a grasp on how the money was being spent, where it gets allocated, and the way it worked. So every night there was a budget meeting that was going to be presented. We were informed that this is budget meeting 5, and it's going to be, let's say, where discussion is going to be sewer expenses, or, you know, infrastructure. So then we had that budget meeting, and then the next one would say this is budget meeting 6. So the last one said, you know, this is our 8th and final budget meeting. So I was just under the understanding it was the final budget meeting of the sections of 8, not that it was our final one for approval. So that, I think that was a misinterpretation. I was just under the understanding this was section 8 of everything that we discussed, and then we would sit down, put it together, and have one final meeting. But again, being new, and, you know, I take full responsibility for maybe not knowing or not looking into or not asking, I guess, the question in advance. But I also have no issue if we can sit for 8 of them, then really pushing it one more week and sitting for budget number 9 to make sure we did everything correctly. I'm okay with that too. We dropped our potential 3-cent increase down to 1 cent. So, you know, for some residents, you know, that 2 cent may not make a difference, but for some it makes a huge difference. And that's where we want it to be. We were hoping not to have to increase it at all, but, you know, realistically, there are things you have to do, and that's one of them. So this year we managed to hold the line at 1 cent. Actually, I'm very proud to say that, you know, the staff at the municipality worked diligently to get it down there and help us get it down there. So, you know, we contributed as well. We're paid X amount for telecommunications or for internet, so we all give that back. So everybody took a little cut, but honestly, with the year that everybody's had with COVID and everything in 2021, it's good to see. It's a team effort, and it seems like it's going to work out for the best.
We'll hear more from Richmond Deputy Warden Michael Digdon later on in the program on a separate issue. But right now, let's shift our focus to Pride Month. That happens every June here in Nova Scotia, and last year the Strait area got on board in a big way as Port Hawkesbury hosted the first ever Strait Area Pride Rally. The organizer of that rally, Taylor Linloff, is busy again coordinating with Port Hawkesbury Town Council on ways to hold virtual and COVID-friendly events to help raise awareness about Pride and the LGBTQI community in general. Fresh off a May 30th virtual workshop in which Linloff showed people how to make their own Pride flags, Linloff joined Port Hawkesbury Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton on Wednesday afternoon for the official raising of Port Hawkesbury's Pride flag just outside the Civic Centre. However, this was a different Pride flag raising ceremony than usual. Linloff and Chisholm-Beaton consulted with Indigenous activists, including Port Hawkesbury's own Bryson Syllaboy, to determine how best to honor the LGBTQIA community while still paying respect to the memories of 215 children whose remains were found at a residential school site in Kamloops, BC. It was determined amongst all parties that the best way to do this would be to raise the Pride flag half-mast during the 9 days that the other 2 flags were lowered. All 3 flags will be brought up to their normal height this coming Wednesday once the 215-hour protest wraps up. Back on the ground, emotional Pride Month messages came from Linloff, Mayor Chisholm-Beaton, and Town Councillor Jason Aucoin, seen here. Linloff's mother, Adele Fox, also spoke to the importance of the celebrations. But before Wednesday's Pride flag-raising ceremonies wrapped up, Linloff and the Mayor had one more surprise for those in attendance.
Back on Sunday, we held a Show Your Pride event on Zoom, which was a craft making activity so people could make their own pride flags to show at home so that we could show our pride throughout Port Hawkesbury and the Strait area in a socially distanced and COVID safe way. So I taught people how to make their own rainbow flag. Moving on, some of us, including Mayor Brenda, decided that she was going to make her own rocks to hide. But we decided we weren't going to hide them.
No.
So why should we hide our pride? But instead you had the idea for the Fountain of Love.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to take the pride painted rocks and we're going to set them right on the fountain down, right next to Grant's Pond. And we invite everybody else to create your own rock art that celebrates pride. And we want you to show your pride with us. So we're going to place our rocks down by the fountain and we hope the idea will catch on. And Taylor came up with a really cool idea of Fountain of Love. So right now it's just a regular fountain, but once it's decorated with all the rainbow and rock art, then it's truly going to be a Fountain of Love. So we hope everybody will participate in that little, I guess, celebration of Pride Month here in the town of Port Hawkesbury. And Pride Month is really, it's all month long, isn't it?
It's all month long.
All month long.
It's what you make it.
Exactly. So if you don't have time till next week to paint your Pride rock, that's okay. You have till the end of June, but hopefully at the end of the June we'll take a picture and hopefully there'll be all kinds of pride displayed there.
So how does Taylor Linlaw feel about the evolution of Pride Month and Pride celebrations in Port Hawkesbury? I asked them about it in this interview. Take a look. And I would hope you would be buoyed and given a lift by the support you got from Port Hawkesbury Town Council, not only the mayor, but every single member of Town Council came on board right away and gave their support and said, whatever we can do, we can. And that sort of thing doesn't always happen in municipal council settings, Taylor. So how did you feel that night when you were making your presentation and it was an overwhelmingly unanimous response in favor of what you were doing?
It felt like getting 10s from the judges in the Olympics.
Partly as a result of that town council support, this has been a very busy week for you, Taylor. On Wednesday, you were raising the Pride flag to half-mast in front of the Civic Center. And this past Sunday, you were involved in a project to encourage other people to design their own Pride flags through a virtual workshop. What other things are you looking at for Pride Month this year?
Another thing I suggested was a coffee house, which is often held at cafes, bistros, etc. And you basically go over, you have a coffee, people play music, people do poetry. And I've been part of one of those before at the Tall and Small Cafe in Antigonish, and it's super fun. It's a good way to just make small talk and also feature local musicians.
Do you network with other local LGBTQIA associations? I think about the Gay Straight Alliance at Sarek. I think about the Rainbow Coalition in St. Peter's. Do you work with them at all in terms of developing ideas, but also to increase the solidarity among the local groups in the area?
I am part of the Rainbow Coalition Facebook group,
yes.
So I'm definitely going to be getting them involved. We're hoping to actually get more youth involved, so we're definitely going to be reaching out to Sarek when we have some more stuff that has been solidified. And I really hope to get a local council of our own involved, because I'll be honest, town councils change, people move, people no longer are able to be part for whatever reason. And I want to make sure that Port Hawkesbury and Strait Area Pride continues when I'm not able to be there.
One thing I am curious about in terms of looking at last year's event and looking at this year's event, obviously there was a really positive groundswell of support. Do you feel that that groundswell has carried on through the year? It's one thing to say that people are allies during Pride Month, and it's quite another thing to say that they're open and supportive all year long. Do you get the sense that there was any change at all from this year to last year, even with dealing with the pandemic and all the lockdowns that we've gone through?
Definitely. I've already had people reaching out saying that they want to get involved this year, so they're keeping it in mind. And I've been starting to be a lot more open about my non-binary identity, and I felt safe to do so. I actually recently got my gender marker on my ID changed to X, which stands for non-binary. So I felt safe being able to show that ID in Port Hawkesbury.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that quickly, just as we're winding down the interview, Taylor. Do you find that there seem to be more circumstances of people declaring themselves non-binary in this area? I know that when you and I were doing some work for Telile on this issue this time last year, you made it clear that you are non-binary. But do you get the sense that more people around the area who are in the same situation might be comfortable in expressing that publicly and openly?
I think so. The tide is really starting to change, and non-binary identity is starting to really come to the forefront. It was something that wasn't really spoken about, honestly. It wasn't really viewed as authentic. It wasn't really viewed as real. It was viewed as a phase or just trying to be special, a snowflake, if you will. But more people are starting to realize that we are outside of the binary. There's just two boxes, and you don't have to fit into those two boxes. I'm actually going to quote something my mom said a few nights ago. And she said, men and women are often pigeonholed into these boxes, into what they're supposed to be as a woman or a man, but you being non-binary, you are shifting, and that's a beautiful thing. You're what you're supposed to be in that day or in that moment.
That's well said, and I'm glad to hear that your mother is carrying that forward for you as well. And in the interest of full disclosure, when we started the first draft of this interview, I misidentified you and used the wrong pronouns and used the pronoun her, and you corrected me, and rightly so, that the pronouns that you're using are they and them. So yep. We're all still learning, and I appreciate your patience, not only with me, but with others, and being able to gently guide us along as we navigate these new waters and try to make sure everybody's given the respect they deserve.
But hey, isn't the reason we do interviews so people can learn?
Yes, exactly. All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground in a short time, Taylor, and I appreciate that. Did you want to add anything else about all of this just before we wrap up?
Keep an eye out, because despite COVID, Pride isn't going to stop. If anyone wants to have suggestions on what we can do or how you can help, always throw me a message on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find.
All right, that's terrific. Well, listen, it's good to talk to you again, and good to have you on board for these Pride Month events. We wish you all the very best, and thank you for joining me once again on Telile 24/7.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Taylor Linloff is a Pride Month planner and LGBTQIA activist in Port Hawkesbury, and we've been speaking to them via Zoom today. Stay tuned for more Telile 24/7 in just a moment. This is our second year marking Pride Month here on Telile 24/7, and once again, we'd like to offer some help to folks who might not know what individual terms within the LGBTQIA community mean. So here's a production that I put together with Taylor Linloff this time last year, and it helps break down what Taylor calls the ABCs of Pride. Take a look.
Hey everyone, my name is Taylor Linloff, and welcome to the ABCs of PRIDE, Pride. Let's start at the beginning, of course, with LGBTQI. The first letter, L, stands for lesbian, which is a woman who is attracted exclusively to other women. G stands for gay. Gay means a man who is exclusively attracted to other men. But wait, it also means an umbrella term for the LGBTQ community, which is why you often hear the term gay rights or gay pride. B is for bisexual. Someone who is bisexual is attracted to two or more genders. T is for transgender, which means identifying as a gender different to the one you were given at birth. Someone may be a trans woman, which means they were raised as a boy but are truly a girl, a trans man, which means raised as a girl but truly a boy, or even something non-binary, which means you may not fit in with boy or girl, and that's okay. I am non-binary. I is for intersex. Intersex individuals may have sex characteristics of both male and female. They may identify as trans or anywhere under the rainbow umbrella, but they may not as well. It's up to the person, so make sure you ask to be respectful. Did you know that the Mi'kmaq community and other First Nations people have their own section of LGBTQ? It's known as 2S, which stands for Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit is a Native-specific identity which encompasses different gender identities and sexual orientations. It is a closed tradition, which means that if you are like me and white, please do not use the term for yourself. C is for cisgender. It's actually not an LGBTQ identity, but it simply means that somebody is not transgender. There's a reason for the word, and it's because we want to normalize the fact that trans people are normal. So we want to find another way to say someone's not trans without saying a normal person. However, cisgender people can also be LGB, which is, again, lesbian, gay, or bisexual.
And now we'd like to focus on an issue that has been front and center at Richmond Municipal Council for the past couple of months, but actually has roots dating back close to 50 years. Richmond County's Deputy Warden, Michael Digdon, has earned the support of his fellow councillors and municipal staff to do a search to find out whether properties around the county were actually properly taxed over the past half-century. The Property Valuation Services Corporation is also on deck with this particular investigation, so we're going to hear from Digdon in just a moment or two, and we'll also hear shortly from the Senior Valuation Officer for the Property Valuation Services Corporation, Lloyd McLeod. First, let's hear from Deputy Warden Michael Digdon on this issue. Can you tell me how this all came about, when you first started noticing that something was up, and what you thought when you found out?
Sure. So I guess it would have been probably early to mid-March. I was approached by a gentleman to look into a piece of property. Upon doing so, we've noted that there were several properties in the area without any valuation on the property is the best way to say it. No assessment value.
All right. And this is not just happening in your district, in District 2. It looks like this is a case in several properties all across the county. Is that true?
It is. It's actually, it seems very widespread right across. Currently just doing my own homework. I've ran probably over 200 properties where it seems like that is the issue. Now, it's not 200 confirmed, but again, that's just, that's barely leaving the island going throughout, I guess District 1, District 2, and part of District 3. So, yeah. It seems widespread. I hope it's not, but currently it seems like it's in that direction. And I shouldn't say I hope it's not, because it's revenue that if we've been missing out, it'll be great to get added onto our income.
I mean, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars here that the municipality hasn't been getting in taxable revenue over the last 40 to 50 years.
Every dollar is a dollar. Is the best way I can say it. And, it's not even a matter of, one, it's a matter of money, but two, it's also a matter of fairness to every taxpayer out there. So it's not right to have one guy paying taxes and the guy next door not. And I think, when I ran for District 2, that was my biggest thing. It was openness, transparency, and fairness. And that's what I'm bringing to the table.
So you have brought this to the council table now, and I'm just wondering, what kind of response have you gotten? It does look like the municipality is willing to work on this, and it does look like the Property Valuation Services Corporation is willing to work on this as well, too. What's your sense of how this file and how this issue is going along?
Well, it seems to be going good. I got to give credit to our staff. They, as soon as I brought it to their attention, they jumped on board with it and approached PVSE to have it looked into, and did the due diligence, I guess, required. We got, I believe it was 7 out of 10 as a return that we had sent off that are now paying property taxes or has an assessment value on that property. So PVSE reached out to me to say that they were in touch with staff and that they were diligently looking into this. Of course, we don't want to do a lot by lot basis. We need a system where you can say you have 14,700 properties in Richmond County. You have 11,000 of them are taxpayers. Where do them other 3,000 pieces of property land or sit in? And that's what we need set up as a system.
So do you feel like there's an end game involved here? I mean, you've told me what you've hoped to see in terms of what exactly happens to these properties and to the property owners, but do you get a sense that there's a finite window on how much longer this investigation is going to go before there are some decisions made? What's your sense on what happens now?
Well, I don't think it's definitely not an overnight process.
No.
It's something that we want to make sure that, we dot the I's and cross the T's very diligently. There's a lot of work, especially for the old properties that, the shake of a hand and the trade of a cow kind of deal back in the 60s and 70s. And some of them properties weren't registered. And then in 85, I believe PVSE jumped on board and started doing the PID numbers and lots of properties have changed from I guess description and breakdowns. I had one just the other day that the lady presented me. It showed lot A and lot B, and now with the PID numbers, there's actually 4 lots or 6 lots of PID numbers in that 2-lot property section. So again, if them 6 lots aren't divvied up and the people, one piece is sold to a gentleman from Ontario, another one is local. And she said that she hasn't been paying taxes because she never got a tax bill. So that's one of the pieces that, will come up hopefully in the search of properties that are, untaxed. People from several areas reached out from several counties. People from Viewpoint reached out to assist and dig in as well, because they also have access to that kind of information. And I believe everybody chips in. We'll get this solved very quickly and get more revenue back on the table.
Well, we've heard from the Deputy Warden. Now let's hear from Lloyd McLeod of the Property Valuation Services Corporation. I got the chance to speak to him via Zoom from his home office in Glace Bay. Here's that interview right now. Joining us now on Telile 24/7 is the Senior Valuation Manager for the Property Valuation Services Corporation. He is Lloyd McLeod. We have caught up with him at his office in Glace Bay. Mr. McLeod, thank you for joining us today.
It's nice to be here.
So we wanted to connect with you because of the issue that's arisen out of the municipality of Richmond County, where officials are now looking back 50 years at properties that may not have been taxed at all or may not have been taxed properly by municipal governments of the day, just trying to make sure the tax revenue is coming into the municipality from those sources. Can I ask you, what was your first reaction when you were made aware of this, when the comments started circulating in local media and when this was brought to the attention of your office? What did you think when you got a first look at it?
As with any inquiry from any of the municipalities, we deal with all the municipalities, of course, across the province. And at different times, issues arise about different accounts and properties, whether they're assessed or not assessed. And so the first thing we did was to get a list was provided from the municipality to us, to have a look at to see if we could reconcile whether the properties were assessed or not assessed. So for us, that means looking through our records and working with the land registry, which is provincial government department. And the land registry is actually the ones who are responsible for creating accounts. Property Valuation Services, that's our corporation. We're responsible for putting the values on those properties that they actually create. So for us, it's just a matter of working with the land registry and working with the municipality to resolve any issues around or concerns about different properties within the municipality.
Now, is this something that happens in municipal units around Nova Scotia? Is this something that your office has encountered, the idea that there could be properties dating back not just a few years, but several decades that haven't been properly taxed? Does this come up often in your line of work? Now, just for the benefit of our viewers, can you explain what the term migration means in terms of property ownership and how that plays into the investigation that's going on here?
Every time a property transfers, or if you sell a property, it has to be migrated into the registry system. And that's a guaranteed for a title of a property. So that never used to be the case. So for the province, if you and I were to do a migration, we hire a lawyer. I've had my property migrated, so that if I go to sell my property, it's already migrated. The new owner knows that the title is guaranteed. So when the province decided to do all theirs, they just did it all in one shot kind of deal, right?
Mr. McLeod, in your experience, when a situation like this comes up, is it necessarily the fault of one person or another that it happened? Does it fall to the municipality? Does it fall to the individual property owners? Or does it seem like it's a variety of factors that can play into a situation like this, where properties that were thought to be taxed actually turned out not to be taxed?
I don't think it's really anybody's fault. It's I've been in assessment for 38 years. So before Property Valuation Services became a corporation, we were a provincial government. But before that, in 1976, actually, the municipalities did their own assessments. So in 76, when the government took over, they just took all the files that municipalities already had. So if there was, accounts that may not have been set up at the time, it's possible they could be missed. But as I said, you have to be careful that you just don't go and create accounts because you could end up with duplicates. And that can create more problems for you down the road. So that's why it's really important that, in this case, that we don't rush out and just start adding, have land registration, start adding accounts. They need thorough investigation. So that's what we're doing now, and we'll work with them to arrive at the answers.
So on that note, can you give me a sense as we wrap this interview up as to where we go from here and where your office goes from here in terms of working with Richmond County to try to sort out these issues? What are the next steps as you see them?
We've already started, as I said, to work with the land registry. Identify, first of all, is to get a list of PIDs that don't have account matches. Try to determine what's the reason that they don't have a PID match. As I said, an example could be that it could be roadways, so there'll never be a PID match for those. There'll never be a PID match, as I said, for First Nation communities. Try to identify situations where, for example, in Richmond, where we have some large industrial commercial properties. There's the New Star property, there's the Port Hawkesbury paper, which in cases like that, you could have multiple PID numbers, but we may have it all assessed on one account. So make those determinations first, which ones that, you don't have to do any further investigation. There's a reason why. And then try to concentrate on, okay, what's left now? And let's see if we can identify, can we work with our partners, land registry, to see if there's deeds to get the proper ownership and to assess them.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground in a short time, Mr. McLeod. I appreciate you giving your thoughts on this. Is there anything else you wanted to add about this situation just before we wrap up?
As always, we work pretty closely with the municipality and the land registry, and we'll work through this.
Well, we know that there's still quite a few steps to go here, but we appreciate you taking some time to explain it all to us. Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod, for joining me on Telile 24/7 today.
You're quite welcome.
Lloyd McLeod is the Senior Valuations Manager for the Property Services Valuation Corporation. He is at his home office in Glace Bay this morning. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. As we wrap up this edition of Telile 24/7, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Taylor Linloff one last time. Now, you've heard from them a couple of times over the course of this edition of Telile 24/7, talking about this month's Pride activities in Port Hawkesbury and the surrounding communities. Well, it's important to note that Pride wasn't always the family-friendly, somewhat sanitized event that it is today. Pride actually started with a riot, literally, in 1969 in New York City. Last year, for our Pride Month special on Telile 24/7, I asked Taylor if they could give some history and some background about the Stonewall riots that precipitated the modern Pride movement. And I'm pleased to share that conversation with Taylor once again.
In the United States in the 1950s and 60s, it was illegal to be caught engaging in what was known as homosexual activity, which ranged anywhere from cross-dressing to drinking and dancing with the same gender. Homophobia and transphobia were so violent and normalized in society that the mafia was often paid to protect the bar patrons. Police took bribes from gay and trans people as to not expose their supposed crimes to the media, mainly newspapers, as a means to humiliate them, ruin families, and leave them jobless, destitute, and alone. On June 28, 1969, in the Stonewall Inn, which was a well-known gathering place for New Yorkers who were LGBTQ, homeless youth, sex workers, drag queens, and other marginalized people, which at the time was, in fact, ran by the mafia. There was a police raid, not unusual, at 1:20 a.m. with approximately 205 people at the bar at the time, leaving people to run and flee for their safety, whether it be physical, emotional, or societal. But as a crowd began to gather around the bar, they were surrounded by the police. It suddenly grew eerily quiet. As the lights went up, they were escorted out of the bar. They began being loaded into the police trucks like they were cattle. A bystander suddenly shouted, "Gay power!" And others began to sing and chant the lyrics to "We Shall Overcome," while people began to throw beer cans and pennies at the police who were taking away their loved ones. Behind the scenes, people were being beaten within the bar. All of a sudden, though, out struts a Miss Stormy DeLarvery, a biracial butch lesbian. She was handcuffed and repeatedly skipping away and running from the cops who were trying to take her away into the police wagons, as she had been caught by police for dressing outside of her gender and dancing with the other ladies. She paused and looked around at the crowd that was just more or less twiddling their thumbs and causing mischief, all the while growing tense. She suddenly shouted, "Why don't you guys do something?" And with that, the crowd erupted into a riot. Police tires were immediately slashed so that people's peers, loved ones, and friends would not be able to be arrested and taken away to their shame. They could flee, they could run, they could survive. Beer cans continued to be thrown, bricks were picked up, and one of those bricks went directly through the front window of the Stonewall Inn. Upon seeing this, the homeless youth and street queens, as they were called, which were simply trans women and drag queens who were often impoverished and homeless, they looked upon the scene in front of them and began to set fire to the garbage cans that were around the Stonewall Inn in direct action against the discrimination they faced due to being poor. And by 2 a.m., the Stonewall Inn was ablaze. Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman and drag queen, came upon the scene and witnessed the whole sight in front of her, from the fire to the riots to the police. She found a shot glass and picked it up and threw it directly at a mirror and exclaimed, "I got my civil rights." The riot went on until July 3rd, nearly a week. And it wasn't just at the Stonewall Inn, it had spread out to surrounding areas such as Christopher Park and Christopher Street. The action didn't end, even though the violence and riots and protests did. 3 different grassroots organizations were formed to bring awareness and basic civil rights to those in the LGBTQ community of New York City. Because of a riot that occurred 51 years ago against police brutality, homophobia, and transphobia, I'm able to safely stand here in front of you through your TV screens, through your computer screens, your iPhone, however you're watching this at this moment. I'm able to safely stand here and announce that my name is Taylor Linloff and I am proudly queer.
And that wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, and a big thank you to my interview guests this week: Michael Digdon, Brenda Chisholm-Beaton, Crystal Nicholas, Bryson Syllaboy, Taylor Lindloff, and Lloyd McLeod. And if you'd like to comment on anything you've seen over the past hour, or just send along some ideas for future shows, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me directly. My phone number is 902-625-8863, and you can email me. The address is adamjrcook, cook with an E, @gmail.com. Don't forget you can contact Telile Community Television directly. The station phone number is 902-226-1928, and you can email using the address info@telile.tv. Don't forget to follow Telile on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The Telile YouTube channel features every single episode of Telile 24/7, including this one, along with interviews and stories from the show, and episodes of our sister French program, Notre Côté. And you can also see all kinds of other entertainment, artistic, and community programming put together by my friends at Telile. And if you'd like to hear Telile 24/7 in SoundCloud form, check out our podcast channel, soundcloud.com/Telile. I'm Adam Cook. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to have you with me this week and every week for Telile 24/7. We'll see you again very soon.